My son-in-law thanked me for paying my grandson's medical bill, then told me I was not family enough to join the vacation my money had helped keep alive. I had sent the payment that same morning. By afternoon, he had found a polished way to remind me where I stood. I read the text once while the kettle hissed behind me, then again with my glasses lowered slightly on my nose, hoping the second reading would soften what the first one had done. It did not. Mary, we appreciate you covering Elijah's medical bill, but my mom wants this vacation to be just immediate family. That was how he wrote it. No insult word, no open disrespect. Just that smooth little arrangement people use when they want to wound you and still be able to say you misunderstood them later. I stood there in my kitchen with one hand on the edge of the counter, now feeling something cold and exact settle under my ribs. Not loud hurt, not even anger yet. Something worse, recognition. My name is Mary Beaumont, and by the time that message reached me, I had spent too many months confusing quiet help with being valued. I have never been the kind of woman who throws her sacrifices around the room to make people kneel under them. If my daughter needed support, I gave it. If my grandson needed care, I handled it. And if the man she married came to me, speaking in a low voice about temporary strain, pride, and trying not to alarm his household, I listened more than I should have. That is the part I can admit now. I believe steadiness in a man was the same thing as honesty. Trevor Pembroke had a careful way about him. He never sounded reckless, never sounded greedy, and he sounded embarrassed in all the right places. That makes a lie much harder to catch when you are already inclined to protect the people you love from panic. I set my phone down, picked it up again, and read his message a third time. The words did not change, but the arrangement of them got uglier. We appreciate you. That meant payment received. My mom wants. That meant blame redirected. Immediate family. That meant useful, but outside. I could almost hear the tone he must have used while typing it, the practiced gentleness, the confidence that I would swallow the humiliation because older women are so often expected to turn disrespect into understanding just to keep the peace. For a moment, I nearly did. I nearly told myself not to make anything of it. Let them go on their vacation. Let the young have their little pride. I let the insult pass through me and die where it landed. Then I remembered what he had posted the night before. It had gone up on his WhatsApp status under a caption that read, "Upcoming blessings," the kind of vague celebration people use when they want attention without questions. I had tapped through casually at first. A restaurant plate, Elijah laughing somewhere in the back seat of a car, then a screenshot that looked like it had been uploaded too fast and deleted too late. Not a beach photo, not a family picture. A booking portal, names blurred by motion and carelessness, but one line painfully clear. Balance due, $50,000 due in 4 days. I had not thought much of it when I first saw it beyond wondering why a man under so much strain was watching a number like that. But standing there with his text open in my hand, I felt the two things locked together so neatly it made me ashamed I had not understood sooner. This was not hardship. This was performance with helpers. I want to ask you something before I go further. Tell me what time you're watching from, because I promise you, when a woman finally sees the shape of disrespect clearly, the hour matters. Some truths arrive in broad daylight. Mine came standing in a kitchen gone too quiet. I opened the screenshot again from where I had saved it, enlarged the balance, and stared until the blur around it disappeared. $50,000 due in 4 days. 4 days. A household that needed me to quietly clear a child's medical burden had no business carrying luxury like that unless someone had decided necessity would be handled by one set of hands while appearances were financed by another. My throat tightened then, not from tears, but from the ugly calm that comes when pain begins turning into arithmetic. I went back to his message and typed slowly, exactly once. Understood. I saw the $50,000 vacation expenses bill you posted due in 4 days. I read my reply before sending it, not to soften it, but to make sure it was clean. Then I pressed send and watched the little check marks appear. The moment I sent that message, I knew I was no longer dealing with a man who needed help. I was dealing with a man who had gotten too comfortable being carried. I did not begin by funding a lie. I began by helping a man who said he was trying not to shame his family. The first time Trevor came to me alone, he did not look like a man preparing to build anything false. When he looked tired in the careful way some men do when they are trying to keep their suffering respectable, his shirt was clean, his voice was steady. Even his shame seemed organized. That is what made him believable. He did not arrive asking for rescue. He arrived asking for silence. He caught me one evening after I had dropped something off for Elijah. Alana was upstairs bathing the boy, and Trevor walked me to the gate with the kind of politeness that never gives itself away. He stood there with one hand in his pocket and the other rubbing the back of his neck as though the words were harder to bring out than they really were. "Ma," he said quietly, not looking straight at me at first, "I need to tell you something, but I'm asking you as a man not to let Alana know yet." Those words alone would have made many women soften. And they did something close to that in me too, though I would hate to admit how quickly. He said work had fallen through. Not permanently, he was careful to add. A contract had ended. Another offer was delayed. A payment he had been depending on had not come when it was supposed to. He spoke like a man balancing bad news in both hands, trying not to let any of it spill on his home. What he feared most, he said, was the look on his wife's face if she started thinking the ground under her family was shifting. What he feared second was his mother hearing half a story and carrying worry everywhere it did not belong. "I just need a little time to straighten it out," he told me. "I can handle it. I just don't want panic before I've had a chance to fix it." It was the way he said fix it that caught me, not boastful. Not dramatic. Just low and urgent, like a man trying to hold on to his own dignity with both hands. I remember studying him in the fading light and thinking this is what pride sounds like when it is not arrogant. This is what a husband sounds like when he is trying to protect his house. The first amount he asked for was not large enough to alarm me. An insurance gap, he called it. Something temporary that would affect medication and one follow-up appointment if it was not settled quickly. He said he hated bringing it to me. I believed that too. I sent it before I got home. After that, the requests came one at a time, each wrapped in a reason that made sense standing alone. A pharmacy balance, a shortfall on rent because money expected had not cleared, school-related costs that could not wait, transport trouble after his car needed work. Once, money he said was for his mother because she had a need he was too embarrassed to leave unattended while he was between things. Each one arrived with the same tone, measured, grateful, temporary. He never pushed. He never demanded. He asked the way people ask when they already know you are trying to be decent. I did not send blindly. That is one thing I want understood. I have always been orderly with money, especially money that leaves my hands. Every transfer alert stayed where it landed. Every screenshot remained in my phone. I kept small note entries the way some women keep grocery lists. Date, amount, purpose, done. Not because I was preparing to throw anything back in his face one day. That has never been my nature. I kept records because life goes smoother when memory does not have to do all the work. And every single time, or Trevor promised the same thing in a different outfit. I'll settle this as soon as the new job clears. This is the last stretch. I won't forget this, Ma. I'll pay back every penny. By the time Elijah's medical bill entered the picture, I was no longer helping a stranger to my daughter. I was helping the father of my grandson, a man who had spent months presenting himself as bruised but determined. That is why I did not stop. Love will often continue where suspicion has not yet found proof. I thought I was helping one ashamed man hold his household together. I had no idea I was feeding a system built on separation. He never took too much at once. That was how he kept dishonesty dressed like bad luck. Looking back now, I can see Trevor's real talent had nothing to do with charm. Men like that are easy to spot when they lean too hard on charm. His gift was control. Not loud control. Not the kind that bangs doors or raises voices or fills a room until nobody else can breathe. Trevor's control was smaller than that, which made it harder to name. He knew exactly how much worry to show, how much pride to keep, and how much gratitude to offer so that every person around him would leave a conversation feeling not drained, but chosen. That was the first trick. He never asked for anything in a way that sounded like taking. He presented each need like a temporary inconvenience he was embarrassed to mention. If he needed help with rent, it was because one delayed payment had created a gap he was already closing. If it was medicine, it was because insurance had made a routine problem more urgent than it should have been. And if school-related costs came up, he spoke as though the timing was unfortunate, not his management. He did not create panic. He created small private burdens that a loving person would feel almost ashamed not to relieve. And he never took too much at once. That matters. A greedy man makes people compare notes quickly. A careful man makes every woman think she is simply helping him through a rough patch no one else needs to be bothered with. Trevor understood that better than I did at the time. He knew that if each request felt isolated, it would never gather enough weight in one place to become a real question. Not immediately. A pharmacy bill today. A transport issue next week. A school payment 2 weeks later. Something small for his mother after that. Then a message full of gratitude. Where's then silence long enough for the whole thing to seem under control again? He was always best right after money changed hands. That was when his hopeful updates arrived. A lead had come through. An interview had gone well. A contract was waiting on final confirmation. A friend had connected him to someone promising. He never overdid it. That was part of his precision. He did not talk like a man selling fantasy. He talked like a man surviving delay. It made patience feel sensible. It made faith feel mature. And because each of us saw a different version of him, none of us had reason to suspect the whole. My daughter saw a husband under pressure, yes, but still standing. That is an important difference. She was not living with a man sprawled out in failure. She was living with a man who still got up, still spoke carefully, still framed setbacks as temporary. There is a kind of dignity women are trained to honor in men, especially when there are children involved. Trevor knew how to wear that dignity even when the foundation under it had already shifted. His mother, I would later understand, saw something even safer. She saw a son carrying adult life in the ordinary way. Busy, private, occasionally strained, but stable. He had not given her enough truth to worry, only enough distance to assume maturity. That is how some children protect themselves best from their parents. Not through rebellion, but through selective normalcy. And me? I saw a man who had fallen temporarily but was still trying to land on his feet before his household felt the shock. That is the version he handed me, and I accepted it because it matched the kind of mercy I believed in. A quiet help, quiet recovery, quiet dignity preserved until the storm passed. If he had come to me sloppy, entitled, or theatrical, he would have lost me early. But Trevor knew how to let shame perform just enough honesty to earn more time. The thing that eventually unsettled me was not the money itself. I have spent money before. I have helped family before. What began to trouble me was the shape of the need. Every time one issue was handled, another surfaced with just enough difference to avoid looking like the same problem in new clothes. The pressure never exploded, but it never ended either. It moved, it adjusted, it returned with a new explanation and the same low, grateful tone. Months passed that way, And somewhere inside those months, before I had proof of anything uglier, a thought began pressing at me when I lay down at night. A temporary problem should have had an edge by now. A man truly climbing out should eventually look closer to the top than the bottom. But every time I thought Trevor was nearing solid ground, another careful emergency arrived to tell me he was still suspended over it. I had been helping for months without ever seeing the bottom of the problem. If you need rescue money to keep your child's life stable, you have no business owing $50,000 on a vacation. I sat back down at my kitchen table and opened Trevor's WhatsApp status the way people return to a sentence. They know they understood correctly, but wish they had not. The screenshot was blurry at the edges, cropped too quickly, and gone from his status by the time most people would have thought to look twice. But I had taken my own screenshot the night before without really knowing why. Maybe some part of me had already felt the wrongness before my mind caught up. Maybe a woman who has spent enough time being useful develops a reflex for saving evidence when gratitude starts sounding too polished. I enlarged the image until the words sharpened as much as they were going to. It was not some vague travel advertisement. It was a payment portal. Dates, installments, a balance line. The kind of screen you only see when something has already been in motion for a while. That was the first thing that disturbed me. This was not a last-minute family escape thrown together after some blessing fell from heaven. It was organized, planned, built in stages, and staged things leave timelines. I pulled my reading glasses higher and reached for my phone. Then for the small notebook I keep near the fruit bowl, where I jot down dates, payments, reminders, the ordinary discipline of a woman who does not like depending on memory when paper can do the job better. Trevor had benefited from that habit more than he knew. Every transfer I had sent him lived somewhere I could find it. Every reason he had attached to those transfers still had a date beside it in my notes: rent shortage, insurance issue, school expense, money for his mother, Elijah's medication, Elijah's bill. I laid the notebook open and set my phone beside it. At first, all I was trying to confirm was whether the timing felt as ugly as it looked. But once I started lining things up, the discomfort changed shape. It stopped feeling like insult and started feeling like design. The portal showed a series of payments, one completed, or another completed. Final balance due in 4 days. I looked at the date on one of the earlier payments, then looked down at my own notes. I blinked and checked again, slower this time, my finger pressing the page flat. The date matched one of my transfers exactly. Not the week, not roughly around that time, the exact day. I did not speak out loud. There was nobody there to hear me anyway. I just sat very still with my thumb resting against the edge of the table and let that one detail settle where it needed to. A match does not prove every dollar went where it should not have gone. I knew that. Life is messier than neat accusations. Money moves through households in ways that overlap. Bills get paid from one account while another account carries something else. I know all of that. I am not a foolish woman. And I am not a dramatic one either. But I also know what a pattern feels like when it begins tightening around your throat. So I kept going. Another payment period on the vacation plan sat dangerously close to the week Trevor had come to me with that low, burdened voice about needing help to keep a school expense from becoming an embarrassment. Another lined up near the days he had spoken about pressure in the house and wanting to shield Alana from worry until something came through. Nothing by itself was enough to let me stand up and declare that I had financed palm trees and ocean views. That is not how truth works when it is still in pieces, but it was enough to show me something colder than theft. While women covered necessity, Trevor had preserved lifestyle. That was the sentence that formed in my head, and once it did, I could not unsee him through it. Not a man drowning, not a man barely keeping his family above water, a man making sure the right people carried the heavy parts while he kept the image of his life from collapsing. I leaned back in my chair and looked toward the window over the sink. Outside, nothing had changed. Somebody was laughing 2 houses down, a car door shut. A dog barked once and then lost interest in whatever had disturbed it. But inside me, something had shifted with a precision I recognized immediately. Hurt had been replaced by arrangement, not because it hurt less, because it had started making sense. That is the dangerous stage of betrayal, not when it first stings, but when it begins to organize itself. I picked up my phone again and opened his message one more time. "We appreciate you." Of course he did. Men appreciate bridges most while they are still crossing them. My mom wants this vacation to be just immediate family. Maybe she had said something broad about family. Maybe she had said nothing at all. At that point, it almost did not matter. What mattered was that Trevor had looked at a woman helping hold up his child's life and still felt comfortable placing her outside the warmth of the picture. That kind of comfort does not grow overnight. It grows where a person has never been made to account for what they are taking. I was no longer deciding whether to respond. I was deciding how much truth I needed to organize before I spoke. I let silence show me how a liar behaves when he realizes the wrong person has seen the numbers. Trevor did not answer my message the way an innocent man would have. He did not say, "That screenshot wasn't what it looked like." He did not say, "Mary, let me explain." He did not even deny it. What he did instead was smaller, smoother, and somehow more revealing than panic. He began circling. The first text came 23 minutes after I sent mine. I think there may be some misunderstanding. Nothing else. No mention of the balance. No mention of the vacation page. No mention of why a man who had needed me to quietly clear Elijah's medical burden was standing so close to a luxury payment with 4 days left on it. Just that neat little sentence, polished enough to sound reasonable, vague enough to avoid the one thing that mattered. I looked at it, then locked my phone and set it face down beside me. An hour later, he called. I watched his name light up my screen and let it ring until the room went still again. Then after that came another message, this one softer in tone, almost offended in its gentleness. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. We've all just been under pressure. Again, no bill. That was when I understood something I had not fully named before. Trevor's gift was not only in telling lies, it was in deciding which part of the truth everyone else would spend their energy reacting to. He wanted me discussing tone, family feelings, his mother's supposed preference, the wording of immediate family, anything but the number, anything but the due date, anything but the quiet fact that a man asking for help with necessities had somehow kept a luxury obligation alive in the same season. By evening, he had called twice more. I did not answer. The next morning, his message came dressed in a lighter voice. The way people do when they think pretending normal will drag you back into normal with them. "Hope you slept okay, Ma. We can talk later if needed." I stared at that one longer than the others. Not because it moved me, but because it confirmed what silence was teaching me. A person who has truly been misunderstood rushes toward clarity. A person who has been caught tries to manage temperature first. So while he managed temperature, I worked. I cleared my dining table and brought everything there. My phone, my notebook, bank alerts, screenshots, email confirmations, the receipt for Elijah's medical bill, old messages I had not read closely in weeks because once money left my hands, I had not wanted to sit in the posture of a collector. But that morning I became one, not a collector of debt, a collector of sequence. I went transfer by transfer, date, amount, reason, his wording, my response. Some messages were short. "Thank you, Ma. I'll replace this as soon as the payment clears." Some were longer, shaped to sound humbled. "I'm ashamed even bringing this to you again, but I'm trying to keep things stable until this next opportunity comes through." Reading them back to back changed them. Alone, each message had sounded like strain. Together, they sounded like architecture. That was the moment another truth arrived and took its place beside the first one. Privacy had protected this lie. Not just his privacy, mine too. I had agreed to secrecy because I thought I was preserving my daughter's peace. I had told myself there was dignity in solving a problem quietly instead of making a household carry fear before it had to. And in families like ours, private help is not unusual. People cover one another discreetly all the time. A bill gets handled. A child's need gets met. Pride is spared where it can be spared. That is the part Trevor used so well. He hid inside a value I respected. By midday, I had several neat piles in front of me, each one looking calmer than I felt. Transfers for household pressure, transfers tied to Elijah's needs, messages where Trevor promised repayment, notes where I had written things down without suspicion because order had always been my habit. I added totals in the margins, then wrote them again on a clean sheet so I would not have to calculate in the middle of emotion. Later. That word sat with me for a while, because by then I was no longer deciding whether Trevor had lied. Then I was deciding what shape truth would need to take before it could no longer be privately managed. I understood now why this thing had lasted as long as it had. Every part of it had been kept in a different room. My help in one room, his marriage in another, his mother's trust somewhere else entirely. A man can live comfortably inside separation as long as the people carrying him never compare what they know. When my phone lit up again that afternoon, I did not reach for it right away. I already knew what it would be. Another careful sentence, another soft landing place, another attempt to keep the damage small enough to survive. Instead, I looked at the papers spread across my table and realized I was past the stage of private disappointment. The truth had grown too large to stay in separate rooms. But my daughter was not living inside the same story I was. That is what made the whole thing uglier once I finally saw it clearly. If Alana had been careless, selfish, or openly disrespectful, then the truth would have landed in a simpler place. Painful? Yes, but simpler. I would have known where to put my anger and left it there without hesitation. But my daughter was not standing beside her husband in deceit. She was standing beside him in trust. And trust, when it is used properly, is one of the most beautiful things a woman can give her home. When it is used against her, it becomes one of the quietest weapons a man can carry without ever raising his voice. I did not know then exactly what she had been told, but once I began arranging the pattern on my own end, I could see the shape of the version Trevor must have been feeding her. Not my version. The one where he came to me in private asking for silence and speaking in the soft language of dignity. Hers would have been different, more intimate, more marital, built carefully around a wife's instinct to protect the man she loves from feeling like less in his own house. I know my daughter. Alana has never been foolish with her heart, soft. Yes, loyal, yes, but not foolish. She is the kind of woman who notices when a sentence changes direction halfway through. The kind who remembers what was said 3 weeks ago, even if the person speaking hopes she has forgotten. That is why Trevor could not have fed her one clean lie and expected it to last. He would have had to adjust it, shift it, let it breathe just enough truth to survive. And that meant, at some point, he slipped. Not enough to expose himself. Just enough to leave a mark. I can see the moment now more clearly than I could then. A late evening. Elijah asleep. The house finally quiet in that fragile way young families only get for a few hours at night. Alana standing near the kitchen counter, not fully relaxed, watching him instead of listening blindly the way she used to. Trevor speaking low, not because he wanted honesty, but because low voices make struggle sound sincere. He tells her a payment is delayed. Then later, in the same conversation, he calls it processing. Then, a few minutes after that, he says something about waiting for clearance. 3 different words. One situation. That is the kind of thing my daughter notices. Wait, she would have said, not sharply, but with just enough weight to slow him down. Young, you said this was already sorted last week. And that is where most men fail. They get defensive. They get loud. They contradict themselves, trying to escape the moment. Trevor didn't. He paused. Not long, but long enough for her to feel it. Then he corrected himself. Not the lie, the tone. It was almost sordid, he would have said, quieter now, stepping closer. They're just holding the final part. You know how these people are. And then, this is where he was most dangerous, he added something that didn't belong to the problem at all. I didn't want to come to you with this. I was trying to handle it. That line doesn't explain anything. It shifts the emotional weight. Suddenly, she is no longer examining the inconsistency. She is reacting to his effort, his pride, his restraint. And just like that, where the question loses its teeth, still, she didn't fully let it go. That is important, because I need the truth about my daughter to remain intact. She would have looked at him a second longer than usual, not convinced, not comfortable, just unsettled. The kind of feeling that doesn't argue but doesn't leave either. What exactly is left? She would have asked. That was the closest she came to catching him, and Trevor, being who he is, would have answered just enough. Just the hospital side, he would say, exhaling like a man tired of his own circumstances. I didn't want your mom involved again. I've already leaned on her too much. That was the line. That was the one that closed the door. Because now the situation was no longer about accuracy. It was about loyalty. A husband trying not to burden his mother-in-law. And a man trying to hold on to dignity. A woman choosing whether to support him or expose him. So she chose him. Not recklessly, not blindly, but emotionally. And she sent the money. What makes this harder to sit with is not that she helped him. It is that she almost saw it. That moment, small as it was, could have changed everything if he had been even slightly less careful, if he had stumbled just a little harder, if his tone had broken instead of bending. But he adjusted, and she loved him enough to accept the adjustment. That is the part people misunderstand about women like my daughter. They think trust means ignorance. It does not. Trust often sees the inconsistency and chooses not to break the person holding it. By then, without either of us knowing it, so two women were carrying the same man through the same season under different names. I was helping preserve her peace. She was helping preserve his pride. And somewhere between those two mercies, Trevor had built himself a system that did not look like deception from the outside. It looked like responsibility. That was the filthiest part of it. Not just that he had taken, but that he had arranged things so that every dollar my daughter parted with felt like devotion instead of duplication. He did not just take money. He made her feel necessary while doing it, and that is a harder thing to forgive than theft. His mother was preparing for a vacation, not for the truth. There is a cruelty some women earn, and a cruelty some women are blamed for simply because a man finds their name useful. Or by the time Trevor sent me that text about immediate family, I had not yet decided which one Harriet Pembroke belonged to. I only knew her as his mother. Dignified, particular, the kind of older woman who carried herself as if order was something she had built with her own hands and did not appreciate people disturbing carelessly. She was not warm in the way some women are. But warmth and kindness are not the same thing. Some women do not pour themselves out easily. That does not make them cruel. It makes them measured. And measured women notice more than they say. That was something I understood later, because the more I sat with what Trevor had done, the less I believed Harriet had truly authored that text. It would have been easy, too easy, to decide she was the kind of mother who thought only her side counted. Easy to tell myself she had looked at everything I had quietly done and still decided I belonged outside the circle. Hurt like simple villains. It settles faster that way. But the facts I had in front of me did not support that kind of neat anger. Trevor had hidden too much from too many people for me to believe he had suddenly become transparent with the one woman whose opinion had shaped him from boyhood. Men who are working that hard to preserve an image do not expose their collapse, where they still want respect. And respect mattered to Trevor. Not the honest kind earned through truth, the staged kind, the kind that lets a man keep standing in family spaces without anybody asking too many questions about what is holding him up. Still, there was something else. Something I had not paid enough attention to at the time. A moment. Small, forgettable, easy to dismiss if you were not looking for trouble. I remembered visiting their house one Sunday afternoon, months before all this began to take shape. Harriet had been there, sitting upright in the living room, her handbag placed beside her in that precise way of hers. Trevor had just come in from outside, keys in hand, moving a little faster than usual. Not nervous, but not settled either. She had looked up at him, not warmly, not coldly, just directly. "Have you sorted that thing with your work?" she asked. The question had been casual, but not careless. Trevor didn't answer immediately. That was the first thing. He took off his watch, placed it on the table, adjusted his sleeve, small movements, unnecessary movements. Then he said, "It's in progress. In progress. Not finished. Not resolved." And not clear, and Harriet had held his face for a second longer than most mothers would, not questioning, measuring. Then she nodded once. She said, like a woman who had heard something she would return to later. And just like that, the moment passed. Conversation moved on. Food was served. Laughter filled the room in that light, careful way families use when nothing is technically wrong. But now, looking back at it through the shape of everything I had uncovered, I understood something I had missed then. She had noticed. She just didn't pursue it. Not because she didn't see, because she had been given just enough normal to let it rest. That is how men like Trevor survive around strong women. They do not lie loudly. They reduce the size of the truth until it no longer demands confrontation. And so I began looking at Harriet differently in my mind, not as a co-signer to my humiliation, as another woman living inside one of Trevor's edited versions. I could picture her more clearly once I let go of the easier anger. She would have known there was a vacation coming, known the dates, perhaps even taken a quiet pleasure in the idea of her family gathering somewhere that looked like progress. She may have believed, honestly believed, that her son was finally entering one of those steadier seasons adult children are always promising their parents they are approaching. If he had mentioned strain at all, it would have been broad, forgettable, busy, demanding, a lot going on, the kind of language that gives a parent enough to feel included, but not enough to investigate. No unemployment, no hidden requests, no private rescue. And certainly no text. That last part settled deepest, because once I replayed Trevor's wording enough times, I could hear exactly what he had done. My mom wants this vacation to be just immediate family. Not we decided. Not we're keeping it small. He did not even own the disrespect in his own voice. He draped it over his mother's shoulders and sent it to me like it had come from the authority of an older woman rather than the convenience of a younger man. That told me more about him than it did about her. He had not just borrowed money, he had borrowed hierarchy. There is something especially ugly about a man hiding behind his mother while receiving help from his wife's. It turns both women into structure for his comfort. One becomes the name he can use to make cruelty sound traditional. And the other becomes the hand he can quietly reach into when tradition has not paid the bills. And Harriet, whatever else she was, did not strike me as a woman who would willingly stand inside that kind of arrangement if she could see it clearly. Pride, yes. Sharpness, perhaps. Control, certainly. But not that. Not after another grandmother had helped keep her grandson's care from becoming a crisis. Not after another woman had been carrying weight she had not even been allowed to see. That thought did not soften what Trevor's message had done to me. It sharpened it. Because if Harriet had not instructed him to send that text, then Trevor had crossed another line I had not fully named before. He had used his mother's dignity as camouflage, and worse, he had counted on me respecting it enough not to question it. By then, the shape of it was widening in ways even I had not seen at the beginning. This was no longer just about money, or one cruel message, or one carefully hidden struggle. This was about the number of separate truths Trevor had built around himself, and the number of women carrying them as if each one were complete. Every woman in his life was protecting a version of him that did not exist, and none of us had yet compared notes. Lies live longest when everyone is loving a different version of the same man. By the morning after I finished sorting the papers on my dining table, I knew silence had done all it could do for me. It had shown me Trevor's instincts. It had shown me his fear. It had shown me exactly how carefully he intended to keep this thing small enough to survive. But silence, useful as it had been, was still only a private room, and private rooms were where he had been strongest all along. I stood there longer than I expected, one hand resting on the back of a chair I had not bothered to push in. For a moment, just a moment, I considered calling him first. Just him, closing the door, letting him explain, letting him talk the way he had always talked when things needed to stay contained. That old instinct to keep things quiet did not leave me easily, but the thought did not hold, because I could already see how it would go. He would soften his voice. He would rearrange the timeline. He would give me just enough truth to make the rest feel like misunderstanding. And then, piece by piece, he would walk back into the same system that had allowed this to last as long as it had. No. If truth was going to stand, it could not stand in fragments anymore. That was when the shape of my next step finally came clear. I was going to call a family meeting, not because I wanted a scene, not because I had reached some loud, trembling place where I needed everybody to feel what I felt. That has never been my way. Pain shared recklessly often gives the wrong person too much room to perform. Trevor would know how to perform. He would know how to look cornered and reasonable at the same time. He would know how to turn a direct accusation into confusion if he were allowed to pick at it one person at a time. And I was no longer interested in conversations he could survive. If truth was going to enter this family, it needed to enter once. Completely. In a room where nobody could leave with a different version of it. I picked up my phone and then put it back down. That part mattered more than I expected. Because deciding to speak is one thing. Deciding not to protect people from what you are about to say is another. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the quiet in my own house, and understood that once I made these calls, I would not be able to return to the version of myself that solved problems quietly and allowed everyone else to remain comfortable. This would change things, not loudly, not all at once, but permanently. I picked up the phone again and called Alana first. My daughter answered on the second ring, her tone light in that way people sound when they have not yet realized the air has changed around them. "Ma? I need everybody at my house tomorrow evening," I said. "You, Trevor, and his mother." There was a short pause, not alarmed yet, just curious. "What happened?" "There are financial misunderstandings that need to be cleared up before any more money moves," I told her. "I don't want anything handled casually from here." My wording was deliberate, calm enough not to create panic over the phone. serious enough that she would not brush it aside as hurt feelings over a text message. I could hear the small shift in her breathing, the part of a daughter that begins searching for tone before words have finished landing. "Is this about Elijah?" she asked. "It's about clarity," I said. "Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. I ended the call before she could climb any further into questions I was no longer willing to answer in fragments. This was not a conversation that could survive being broken into pieces, and I had learned that the hard way. Calling Harriet took more from me than I expected, not emotionally, structurally. I knew that whatever I said had to be respectful without becoming soft. She answered in that measured way of hers, voice precise, already sounding like a woman who dislikes being called without reason. "Harriet speaking." "It's Mary Beaumont," I said. "I'd like you at my house tomorrow evening. There are some financial matters concerning Trevor that need to be clarified in one place." That was all. She did not ask much, which told me something too. Women of her generation know when a sentence has been tightened on purpose. She simply said, "All right," in a tone that carried caution without surrender, and the call ended there. Trevor was the last person I contacted, and even then, I did it by message instead of voice. I no longer wanted him using my pauses to judge how much damage had already formed. "Be at my house tomorrow at 6 p.m. We need to review financial matters with everyone present." He read it quickly. No answer for 4 minutes. Then, "Is that really necessary?" I stared at that line longer than I expected. Necessary. A man can receive months of private help, use one woman's name to diminish another, stand under a $50,000 vacation balance, and still reach for the language of inconvenience when accountability calls his name. That one sentence confirmed what I needed it to confirm. He was not preparing to tell the truth. He was preparing to manage it. I did not respond. I did not need to. My silence had meaning now. Once the meeting existed, my work changed. Up until then, and I had been gathering truth. Now I had to sequence it. I cleared the dining table again, slower this time, and began arranging everything not by category, but by impact. First, the unemployment. That had to come before the money, or Harriet would spend the evening reacting to betrayal in the wrong order. Then the transfers. Then Elijah's bill. Then the text. Then the timing overlaps. I went back through my records twice. Not because I doubted them, because I refused to get anything wrong. That part took longer than I expected. Dates had to match. Messages had to sit beside the right receipts. Amounts had to add up cleanly without hesitation. I rewrote the summary sheet once, then again, until it could be followed by anyone in that room without explanation. I tabbed pages. I made copies. And I removed anything that would invite distraction instead of clarity. I did not do any of it with shaking hands. That was the part that surprised me. I had expected rage at some point, expected grief, expected one of those hot surges women are always warned against because it makes other people comfortable calling them emotional instead of accurate. But what I felt instead was colder and far more useful than rage. I felt exact. Trevor had spent months benefiting from my instinct to help. By that afternoon, I was no longer helping. I was keeping record. That is a dangerous turn for any liar. Because once a woman like me stops carrying your story and starts arranging your proof, the ground under you changes without making a sound. By the time the light outside my window thinned into evening, I had 3 envelopes ready. I had one folder for myself, and a single page on top that listed only what mattered most. Not every wound, not every insult, just the bones of the truth. Enough to keep anyone from wandering, enough to stop Trevor from slicing the room into separate sympathies. I looked down at the papers one last time and understood something I had not been willing to name before. This was not revenge. This was correction. Not because I had lied before, but because I had allowed truth to stay in the wrong places. That was over now. Tomorrow it would sit in one room, and for the first time since he came to me, asking for silence, Trevor would have nowhere left to put it. Everyone came with a different misunderstanding. Only one person came afraid. I knew that before the doorbell rang the first time. There's a particular kind of stillness a house takes on when something inside it is about to change shape. My living room was clean in a way that looked ordinary to anybody else, but I had prepared it with intention. The good chairs were out. Water glasses sat untouched on coasters. The folder I needed was on the coffee table, closed but visible. 3 envelopes rested beside it, neat enough to look harmless. Nothing dramatic. Nothing arranged for spectacle. I had no interest in giving Trevor a room he could later describe as hostile. Truth does not need help looking serious. Alana arrived first, which did not surprise me. My daughter has always been the kind of woman who gets to tension before it has time to harden. She stepped in holding her handbag too tightly, eyes searching my face before she even greeted me. "Ma," she said, and voice lower than usual. "You're worrying me." I kissed her cheek and told her to sit down. She did, but not fully. Her body stayed half poised like someone prepared to stand again if the conversation turned in the wrong direction. "What is this about?" she asked, not loudly but directly this time. "You sounded serious on the phone." I didn't answer immediately. That pause unsettled her more than any words would have. "It's something we need to go through together," I said. Her brows pulled slightly. "Is this about the message Trevor sent? Because if it is, I already told him." "We'll talk when everyone is here," I said gently, but final. That was the first shift. She leaned back, but not comfortably. Not relaxed, just contained. Whatever she had prepared herself for. It wasn't this. Harriet came next. When she entered with exactly the composure I expected. No extra warmth, no visible irritation. Just a woman too disciplined to arrive looking confused, even when confusion is exactly what brought her there. Her eyes moved through the room before settling on me. The table, the water, the folder, then back to me again. Mary, Harriet. That was all between us at first. She took her seat carefully, crossing one leg over the other, handbag placed beside her with precision. If Alana thought this evening was about emotion, Harriet thought it was about structure, something to be clarified, something to be resolved cleanly. Her face said she was prepared for discomfort. It did not say she was prepared for exposure. Trevor came last. That, too, did not surprise me. Then he walked in with the controlled casualness of a man trying to arrive before suspicion does, but it was already in his eyes before he sat down. He greeted me first. "Ma." Not warm, not careless, measured. Then his gaze moved quickly. Alana, his mother, the table, the folder. Too quick, not frantic, but searching, measuring. That was how I knew fear had arrived before he did. He sat beside Alana and leaned forward almost immediately. "I think maybe there's been some misunderstanding about Trevor." Alana cut in softly, placing her hand on his arm. Let her speak first. That was the second shift. Small, but important. He paused, just for a second, then tried again. "I just don't want this to turn into something unnecessary." I raised one hand, not high, not sharp, just enough. "That we're not starting with your explanation," I said. The room changed on that sentence alone, not loudly, but completely. Alana's hand slowly dropped from his arm. Harriet's chin lifted, just slightly. Trevor leaned back, but not comfortably. It was the movement of a man realizing the room was no longer his to guide. I sat down across from them and folded my hands once before opening the folder. "I asked everyone here because I don't want anyone leaving this room confused," I said. "Too much has already been handled privately." There was a pause, not silence, a waiting, Alana shifted slightly in her seat. If this is about money, Ma, you could have just called me. It is about money, I said. Then I added, but not in the way you think. That stopped her completely. No one spoke after that. But this silence was not calm. It was recalibration. I could feel each person trying to place themselves inside what this meeting was becoming. Alana still reaching for something emotional. Harriet beginning to sense something procedural. Trevor already knowing better and trying to stay ahead of it without speaking too soon. But I had spent too many months allowing his version of events to move from one private conversation to another. I was done helping him keep his balance, so I did the simplest thing first. I drew out one sheet of paper and placed it on the coffee table between us. No flourish, no speech, just paper. Trevor looked down at it immediately. Alana followed his eyes. Harriet waited half a second longer, as though instinct had warned her not to move too quickly toward what was about to become real. Alana leaned forward first. "What is this?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not yet, because the paper could speak before I did. The document itself was ordinary, a transfer confirmation, date, amount, reference line. On its own, it could have meant anything. Family support, temporary help, a small private kindness. Nothing loud enough to fracture a room, nothing dramatic enough to accuse a man. But that was not what made it dangerous. What made it dangerous was that Trevor's mother should have known why it existed, and she didn't. I watched Harriet's eyes move across the page slowly, then stop, not reacting, not speaking, just stopping. That was when I knew. The first receipt didn't expose a crime. It exposed a secret, and secrets, once placed in the wrong room, do not stay small for long. Yom, your son has been unemployed for 8 months. I said it plainly because truth weakens when you dress it too carefully. For a second, nobody moved. The words did not land all at once. They hung there, heavy and uninvited, while each person in the room tried to decide whether they had heard something impossible or something they had simply not been allowed to know. Then it began to settle, not evenly, in pieces. Harriet went still first. Not the kind of stillness people perform when they are offended and preparing a response. A deeper one. Her back, already straight from habit, somehow straightened further, as though dignity itself were the only thing she could reach for quickly. She turned her head slowly toward Trevor, not toward me. That part mattered. A mother can question another woman's tone, and she cannot easily question the face of the son she raised, especially when that face begins avoiding hers in real time. Alana reacted differently. She frowned almost immediately, but hers was not shock. It was arithmetic. Confusion moving too quickly toward a timeline. I knew things were tight, she said, her voice already trying to organize what she had heard. You said... She stopped, then looked at Trevor. You said the contract was delayed, not gone. Trevor shifted. That was the first real movement from him. Not large, but enough. It's not exactly like that, he said quickly. I didn't say I lost everything. I said things slowed down. 8 months is not slow, I said. He turned to me then, sharper than before. I was still working on things, he said. Deals don't just... Trevor. Harriet didn't raise her voice, and she didn't need to. That single word stopped him more effectively than anything I had said. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since this began, something in his expression shifted from control to calculation. He was deciding which version of the truth he could still survive. That is always the moment that matters most. I didn't rush to fill it. Silence, used properly, forces honesty closer to the surface. But Trevor reached for something anyway. I didn't want to bring stress into the house before I had a solution, he said softer now. I was handling it. Handling. That word sat in the room like something that had overstayed its welcome. Alana looked at him again, slower this time. "Handling it?" she repeated, but not to argue, to understand. "Then why didn't you tell me how long it had been?" He hesitated. Too long. That was all it took. The room shifted again. I slid the first document closer to Harriet, then another, then the summary page I had written in my own hand. Dates, amounts, notes. Nothing dramatic, just order. Because some truths need to be seen in more than one form before people stop trying to outrun them. "The first time Trevor came to me," I said, keeping my eyes on the papers instead of his face, "he told me he had already lost his job. Not that things were slowing, not that something was pending." I placed the page flat. He said it was gone. Harriet inhaled sharply through her nose. Still no words, but that breath carried something stronger than interruption. It carried recognition. I continued. "He asked me not to tell anybody." Then he framed it as dignity, temporary pressure, a short season. He said he only needed time. I lifted one page and placed it down. This was the first transfer. Another. This was the rent shortage. Another. This was medication. Another. This was school. I did not rush. A room under real truth does not need speed. Speed helps liars. Order helps memory. So I gave the evening the shape Trevor had spent months preventing it from having. Across from me, Alana's face was changing in pieces. Not into anger. Not yet. Rage needs firmer footing than that. What she had first was disorientation. Her eyes moved from one receipt to the next, then to Trevor, then back again, searching for the version of him she had married and trying to place him inside what was now sitting in front of her. "You told me it had been a rough stretch," she said quietly. Trevor nodded too quickly. "It was. It is. I just didn't think." 8 months?" she said. And this time, it was no longer a wife asking for clarification. It was a woman hearing the size of a silence for the first time. Harriet finally spoke, but not to me. Trevor. Just his name. I have lived long enough to know when a mother's voice changes shape around her child. That one word carried disbelief, insult, and the first thin crack of humiliation all at once. Not because her son had struggled. Life can humble anybody. But because he had let her sit comfortably inside a false normal, while another woman carried burdens she had not even been allowed to see. Trevor leaned forward then, palms open in that careful or controlled way men use when they want a room to read them as reasonable before they have earned it. "I was trying to fix it before it got worse," he said. "I didn't want everybody dragged into something I could handle." "Handle?" Alana said under her breath. He ignored that. "I had things lined up," he added quickly. "I just needed a little more time." That was the closest he came to a lie that night. Not because it was entirely false, but because it was no longer large enough to hold what had already been exposed. "Temporary?" I asked, finally looking at him fully. He met my eyes, just for a second, then looked away. "Temporary things do not last through rent, medicine, school, your mother's needs, and my grandson's medical bill." That struck him harder than a raised voice would have, because now the room had moved past explanation and into pattern. I turned back to the table and placed my hand on the stack of papers nearest me. I helped because I believed I was protecting my daughter and grandson from fear, I said. Not because I wanted leverage, not because I wanted praise. I paused. Let that settle. I helped because I thought I was the only one quietly keeping this house standing until you found your footing. And then I added, slower this time, because the room was ready for it now. And apparently, I let my eyes move from Trevor to Alana to Harriet. I was not the only one keeping your house alive. My daughter realized she paid into a bill I had already erased. There are some truths that enter a room loudly, slamming through people's pride before they can arrange themselves around it. And there are others that arrive with a far colder cruelty. They do not shout. They line themselves up beside memory and wait for somebody to recognize the match. That is what happened to Alana. After I said I was apparently not the only one keeping her house alive, the room changed in a way even Trevor could feel. He did not speak right away. That told me more than words would have. A man still clinging to innocence rushes to fill silence. Trevor had started learning by then that too much speech would only give the truth more surface to grip. Alana turned toward me slowly, not dramatically, not with accusation, with the cautious expression of someone who had just heard a sentence that did not fit inside the world she thought she understood. "What do you mean?" she asked. It was not a challenge. It was a daughter reaching for a ledge before the floor changed shape under her. I looked at her, then down at the papers, and for the first time that evening I felt the full weight of what this next part was going to do. It is one thing to expose a man. It is another thing to place before your own child the exact proof that the trust inside her marriage had been used as a tool. But by then, we were beyond mercy that hides damage. The kindest thing left was accuracy. I opened the smaller envelope I had set aside for Elijah's expenses and drew out the hospital statement and the payment confirmation attached to it. I laid them carefully on the table between us. Elijah's medical bill was settled in full, I said, by me. Trevor moved then, just slightly, but not enough to interrupt, more like a man feeling the walls of a room narrow around his shoulders. Alana frowned and leaned forward. Her hand hovered over the paper before touching it, as though the act of physically pulling it closer might commit her to something she was not yet ready to know. She read the statement once, then again. Then she looked at the payment line, the date. I saw it happen in her face before she said a word. Her eyes sharpened, then widened just enough to betray memory rushing back faster than composure could contain it. She sat back, then leaned forward again as if distance might change what the paper was saying. It did not. "That date," she said quietly. No one answered. She turned her head toward Trevor, but not fully. Just enough that he could feel the direction of her attention without mistaking it for invitation. "That's the same week you told me the hospital was still holding things up." Trevor swallowed. It was complicated. Complicated. That word should have dissolved in shame before it reached the air, but he said it anyway. Maybe men say foolish things when a truth gets too precise. Maybe they still hope blur can save them even after the lines have already come clear. Alana looked back down at the paper. Then something else reached her. No one had to say it aloud. Memory did the work. I watched my daughter's right hand tighten slowly around the edge of the document as another date rose in her mind and placed itself beside the one in front of her, the date of her own transfer. The $15,000 she had sent him after he had come to her with that tired husband's face and that quiet, burdened voice. And I could almost hear the scene rebuilding itself in her head from the way her breathing changed. He had told her he was ashamed to come back to me. He had told her the hospital had not fully cleared the balance. He had told her he just needed help getting the final pressure off the family. He had let her feel like she was stepping in, where a wife should step in. And all the while, the bill was already dead. "When I sent you that money," she began, then stopped. Trevor looked at her now with the caution of a man trying to measure whether tenderness still had any market left between them. "Alana, listen to me." "No," she said. It was the first time that evening her voice cut cleanly enough to stop him before he finished. Not loud, not wild, just final in a way I had not heard from her before. She looked at him fully then, and whatever she saw on his face did not comfort her. It made something inside her settle. You told me," she said, each word slower than the last, "that you didn't want to ask my mother for more. You told me this was what was left." Trevor opened his hands again. I was trying to keep things moving until everything cleared. But the room had moved past his language by then. What broke in Alana was not simply trust in his honesty. It was trust in the moral meaning of her own love. That is the part people forget when they talk about betrayal, as though it only hurts because somebody lied. Betrayal also rewrites the memory of what you thought your goodness was doing. My daughter had not just been helping her husband. She had been helping a lie stand upright in her own home. I did not speak. I did not need to. This part belonged to her. And Harriet said nothing either. She was sitting with both hands folded tightly now, the kind of tightness older women slip into when anger has not yet decided whether it wants to come out as speech or shame. Trevor, for all his earlier smoothness, had finally begun to look like a man whose careful compartments were splitting open in front of the wrong witnesses. And Alana, my daughter, who had entered that room thinking this might still be some bruised misunderstanding, sat staring at the date that had just rearranged her marriage in her mind. Love didn't break in that moment. It understood. Your mother did not tell me to stay home. You used her name. By then, the room had already lost its softness, not in volume. Nobody was shouting. Nobody had stood up. The walls were still the same color they had been when everybody arrived. The glasses of water still half full, the evening still wearing the face of an ordinary family meeting if somebody had walked past the window and looked in without context. But inside that room, something gentler had already been removed. The kind of assumption families rely on when they want to believe the worst thing in front of them is a misunderstanding. It was no longer a misunderstanding. Alana was still staring at the hospital statement and the payment line beneath it, like a woman trying to understand how paper had managed to say something her marriage had hidden better than words ever could. Harriet sat straighter than before, but not from composure now, from strain. Trevor had gone quiet in that careful way men do when they realize their voice is no longer helping them, and I knew, one with a clarity so sharp it almost felt like calm, that there was one more layer of him I needed to strip away before the room could stop making excuses for what kind of man he had chosen to be. So I reached for my phone. No one asked why. That was the state we had entered by then. The room no longer interrupted evidence. It waited for it. I unlocked the screen, opened the thread, and looked down once to make sure I was holding the right message. Not because I doubted myself, but because there are moments in a woman's life when accuracy becomes the only form of mercy left. Then I lifted my eyes to Trevor. The money was one thing, I said. The lying was another. But this... I angled the phone toward myself and read the message out exactly as it had come. Mary, we appreciate you covering Elijah's medical bill, but my mom wants this vacation to be just immediate family. I did not raise my voice while reading it. I did not need to. Some sentences embarrass themselves when spoken aloud in front of the people they tried to rearrange. When I finished, nobody moved for a beat. Then Harriet turned her head, not toward me, toward Trevor. It was a slow turn, but there was nothing uncertain in it. I had seen many kinds of silence in that room already. Shock, confusion, shame beginning to harden. But this was different. This was a mother measuring the distance between the son she thought she knew and the one now sitting in front of her with another woman's words still hanging in the air. Her mouth parted slightly, then closed again. One hand tightened once against the arm of the chair. And then, with more control than most people would have managed in her place, she said the only line she needed to say. I never said that. That was it. No speech, no outrage. No scrambling to explain herself to me, just 5 words clean as glass. And they did exactly what I knew they would do. They took Trevor's last layer of shelter and removed it in front of both women he had been trying to manage. Because until that moment, some weak little corner of the evening could still have been tempted to pretend there had been family confusion, a preference miscommunicated, a plan translated badly, generational awkwardness, women hearing each other wrong through a man trying too hard to keep peace. Families survive on those kinds of excuses every day. They feed on them. They use them to keep ugly truths from maturing into consequences. But I never said that killed all of it at once. Trevor shifted in his chair. That's not what I meant. I looked at him and felt nothing soft move in me. You thanked me for paying Elijah's bill, I said. Then you used your mother's name to place me outside your family. That's not what I was doing, he said, but his voice had lost its old balance now. The careful confidence was gone. What remained was the sound of a man reaching for language after truth had already chosen its shape. Harriet still had not looked away from him. You wrote that, she said, quieter this time. Not asking, not clarifying, naming. Trevor swallowed. I was trying to avoid... Avoid what? Alana asked. That was the first time she entered this part of the room with full force. Not loudly, not emotionally, but clearly. The difference mattered. Satur's hurt from the last chapter had not dissolved. It had sharpened. She was no longer listening as a wife hoping to preserve something. She was listening as a woman deciding what exactly had been done in her name, in her mother's name, and under her roof. What were you trying to avoid? She asked again. Trevor looked from her to me, then to his mother, and for the first time since this meeting began, there was nowhere in his face to put dignity. Not the true kind, not even the false kind he had been wearing all these months. Because what do you call a man who takes help from one mother, hides collapse from another, and uses the second woman's authority to disrespect the first? There is no respectable word for that, only layers of character finely stripped down to motive. I set the phone face down on the table. This wasn't about vacation space, I said. It wasn't about preference. It wasn't even about whether I wanted to go. It was about what kind of man receives help with one hand and arranges humiliation with the other. Trevor's mouth tightened. He looked as if he wanted to say something polished, something that could still rescue him from the moral shape of what had happened. But the room had moved beyond polish. The bill had already shown his appetite. The receipts had shown his dependency. The hospital statement had shown his duplication. And now his own mother's voice had shown his cowardice. There was nothing left to hide behind. I brought arithmetic, not emotion. By that point, nobody in my living room was still waiting for comfort. The room had already moved beyond misunderstanding, beyond explanation. So even beyond that last weak stage where people keep hoping one cleaner sentence might somehow rescue a dirty truth. What remained now was structure. Not his structure. Mine. The one I had built back on my dining table when I realized pain alone would never be enough to hold a man like him still. I opened the main folder and spread the papers across the table slowly, deliberately, giving each page its own space. I did not stack them. I did not rush them. I placed them in a line that forced the eye to move forward whether it wanted to or not. Date, amount, reason, message, then again, date, amount, reason, message, a path, not clutter. I wanted Trevor cornered by sequence. This is what I sent, I said. My fingertip rested on the first transfer longer than necessary, not for effect, for weight. And then I moved to the next, and the next. Rent shortage, a pause. Medication, another pause. School expense. I shifted one page slightly forward. Transport, another. Support for your mother. And then, Elijah's medical costs. Each word sat in the room a little heavier than the last. The language itself was ordinary. That was what made it worse. There was nothing dramatic in what I had been covering. No indulgence, no excess, no luxury disguised as need. Just survival, just responsibility. Just the quiet costs of a household that had been standing because someone outside of it refused to let it fall. Trevor didn't reach for the papers. He didn't even lean forward. He stayed where he was, hands resting too still on his knees. Or like a man who understood that touching the evidence would make it real in a way he could not walk back from. Alana had not moved either, but I could see it in her fingers, the small tightening, the subtle curl of her hand against her lap. Her body had not yet caught up with what her mind was beginning to accept. Harriet's mouth had flattened into something thinner than disapproval. It was calculation now. Measurement. I continued. These are the messages that came with them. I slid the printed screenshots out one by one. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. I'll replace this as soon as the payment clears. I'm ashamed to even ask you again. I just need a little more time to steady things before Alana starts worrying. You're the only one helping me right now. That was where I stopped. Not because I had run out of evidence, because the room had shifted. The air changed in a way you could feel without seeing. I let the sentence sit. No explanation, no commentary, just the words. You're the only one helping me right now. Alana inhaled, not loudly, but enough. The kind of breath a person takes when something inside them has just aligned in a way they cannot undo. Then I turned toward her. And to your wife, I said, you told a different story. Trevor's shoulders moved, barely, but it was there. That small betrayal of control the body gives before the face catches up. I didn't say it like that, he said quietly. Then, a second later, trying to recover. You're making it sound like I planned this. There it was, not strong, not convincing, but human. I looked at him for the first time since I began laying the papers down. No, I said. A pause. I'm showing that you maintained it. That ended that. I didn't look at him again. You told her you didn't want to involve her mother. I placed the note down. You told her you were trying not to come back to me. Another page. You told her she was helping you carry the last part. Each sentence landed slower than the last, because I was removing escape. Alana lowered her eyes, not in shame, in recognition. That was the moment her memory stopped protecting him. I could see it happening. Every late-night conversation, every softened tone, every careful explanation that had made her feel like a partner instead of a participant in something already finished. That is the violence of this kind of betrayal. It does not just take, it rewrites. I placed the next sheet down. This is the full total. The number sat there, clean, unarguable. But just before I spoke it, I paused and lifted one of the earlier pages slightly. This one, I said, tapping it once. I almost dismissed. That caught their attention. Even Trevor looked up. It came through without a clear note, no explanation, just a transfer. I let that sit for a second. Same day you told me you were trying to fix a school issue. I placed it back down. I gave you the benefit of the doubt then. Then I added, quieter. I don't need to anymore. That was the imperfection. Small, but enough. I read the total aloud, slowly. Then again with the dates beneath it. No one interrupted. No one corrected. No one even shifted to pretend disagreement. And I placed the category sheet beside it again, because repetition removes denial, household need, child's care, temporary support, practical strain, all of it, stacked, aligned, undeniable. Then I reached for the final piece, the vacation portal. I lifted it just enough for everyone to see before placing it down, not on top of the transfers, beside them. That detail mattered, because this was not confusion, it was overlap. "I'm not saying every dollar I sent paid for this," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I am saying these dates overlapped while necessity was being covered elsewhere." I pointed. 1 vacation payment, 1 transfer, same day. Trevor exhaled slowly. "It wasn't like that," he said, but there was no structure behind it anymore. Things were mixed together. Mixed. And that was all he had left. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Harriet's eyes moved first, from the portal to Trevor, then back again, slowly, like a woman watching 2 versions of reality refuse to sit in the same place. Alana didn't cry. That told me everything. Some pain arrives too clean for tears. It organizes first. Trevor spoke again, weaker this time. It got out of hand. The sentence landed small, almost careless in a room that had already outgrown it. I looked at him, and for the first time that evening there was nothing left in me that wanted to soften what came next. "No," I said. "It got managed." That was the sentence that closed the room, because panic looks messy, shame looks uneven, mistakes look scattered. But this had been maintained. He had told me I was the only one helping him, and he had told his wife he was trying not to involve me. He had let his mother believe there was stability where there was none. He had built separate doors into the same lie, and walked through each one with a different face. When I said the full amount again, slower this time, something shifted that no one tried to stop. No gasps, no defense, no last-minute explanation reaching for sympathy. Just stillness, but not confusion, not anymore, recognition. And in that moment, for the first time since this began, there was nothing left in the room for Trevor to rearrange. You called it borrowing, so I wrote it down like a debt. There is a point in some rooms when pain has finished proving itself and consequence has to enter before dignity leaves for good. By the time I said those words, nobody in my living room was still dealing in feelings alone. Feelings had brought us there, yes. Hurt had opened the door. Shock had seated itself in every chair. But what sat on that table now was no longer emotion. It was record. And record has a different kind of weight. It does not argue. It does not beg to be believed. It waits. I reached for the final envelope. Trevor noticed before anyone else did. Of course he did. By then he had learned the rhythm of my evening well enough to understand that I had not spent 2 days gathering proof, just to end in wounded motherhood. His eyes shifted to my hand before I even touched the paper. The way a man watches the last move in a game, he now realizes he is already lost but still cannot stop. Men like him are often most afraid not of anger, but of order. Anger can be survived. An order can follow you home. I slid the envelope out slowly and unfolded the pages inside, not dramatically, not with emphasis, just enough movement to let the room understand something had changed again. Clean copies, typed, dated, structured. The total amount sat at the top where no one could pretend not to see it. Beneath it, every category laid out in the same language he had used to secure my help. And under that, the repayment plan. Monthly installments, start date, review point, final balance, no threats, no performance, just terms. The kind of paper that does not ask for agreement. The kind that replaces conversation. Alana's eyes moved first, from the number to me, then back again. I watched her swallow once, not from confusion this time, but from the quiet understanding that this was no longer about what had happened. This was about what would happen next. Harriet did not move, but something in her posture changed, not outwardly, internally, the kind of stillness that comes when a woman stops waiting for explanation and starts measuring consequence. Trevor stared at the page, longer than necessary, long enough for everyone to see that this was not what he had prepared himself for. He had expected anger. He had expected accusation. He may even have expected some form of emotional demand he could reshape, delay, or soften. But this required participation. "You said more than once that you would pay me back," I said. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "You called this borrowing. You called it temporary help. You said every penny would be returned when you got back on your feet." I placed the pages directly in front of him, not halfway, not loosely, in front of him. So I wrote it down the way it should have been treated from the beginning. He didn't touch it, not immediately. His hands stayed where they were, resting against his knees, fingers slightly spread like a man deciding whether touching something would commit him to it. That hesitation said more than any denial could have, because a man who believes he is being treated unfairly reaches for the paper. A man who knows the paper is accurate delays. "This is too much," he said finally, but even that came out wrong, flat, unanchored, not because the number was incorrect, because of what he had chosen to call excessive, not the taking, not the lying, not the double handling of two women under the same roof of truth, the structure. I let the silence sit on him, long enough for the room to hear what he had actually said. Then I answered, "No." A pause. "This is the first time it has been honest." That line settled something. Not loudly, but completely. Alana lowered her eyes, not away from me, away from the version of her marriage she could no longer hold together. I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, but in recalibration. The kind that comes when a woman realizes she is no longer standing inside the same story she walked into. Harriet still had not spoken, but she no longer looked like a mother preparing to defend. She looked like a woman measuring the cost of what her son had chosen to become. That difference matters. Yet the repayment plan was not cruel. That mattered to me. I had not written numbers designed to break him. I had written numbers designed to remove fog, a beginning, a middle, an end. No room for interpretation, no room for delay disguised as effort. And one final line that mattered more than all of it. All future requests for private financial support will cease immediately. No more quiet rescue, no more hidden pressure, no more woman-to-woman peace being financed by my silence, while a man arranged appearances elsewhere. I looked directly at Trevor. "This is the last time my help will ever need your silence." That was the line that changed the air, because money was not the only thing I had withdrawn. I had withdrawn access, not to my grandson, not to my daughter, but to the system, the quiet one. The one that had allowed him to move between women without being held in one place long enough to be seen clearly. Trevor understood that. You could see it, not in his face, in his shoulders. Something left them, not confidence. That had gone earlier, something deeper, the belief that he still had time, that he could still rearrange outcome, that consequences could still be managed the way everything else had been. He reached for the paper then. Slowly, finally. His fingers touched the edge first, like a man testing whether something is real before committing to it. Then he pulled it closer. His eyes moved across the page, line by line, not skimming, not negotiating, reading. And for the first time that evening, he looked like what he had spent months avoiding becoming: accountable. No one spoke. No one moved to soften it. Not his wife, not his mother, certainly not me. And when the room went still after that, it was not the stillness of shock anymore. It was the stillness that comes when a man understands something has closed, not loudly, not violently, but completely. Tomorrow had already been rearranged, and for the first time since this began, time was no longer something he could use to escape it. The marriage did not end that day. The trust did. People who have never sat inside a room after truth has finished speaking often imagine collapse as noise, raised voices, doors, somebody storming out so the hurt has a shape the neighbors can understand later. But that is not how some things end. Some things end in stillness so complete it feels almost disrespectful to move too quickly inside it. That was the kind of ending that sat in my living room after I placed the repayment papers in front of Trevor and told him my help would never again need his silence. Nobody spoke, not because there was nothing to say, because there was nothing left that could change anything. Nobody reached for the vacation document. It stayed where I had left it, half-angled beside the transfer pages and hospital statement, its polished booking portal, and that ugly balance line now stripped of everything it had tried to represent. $50,000 due in 4 days had looked like aspiration when he first flashed it through that status. By the end of the meeting, it looked exposed, small, almost embarrassing. A performance that had outlived its audience. Even paper can be humiliated when the truth around it changes. Alana sat very still, and not the kind of stillness people use to punish a room by refusing to speak, the kind that happens when something inside a person has shifted so completely their body has not yet decided how to follow. Her hands were folded in her lap tighter than before. The knuckles pale, the fingers slightly stiff like they had forgotten how to rest. Her face had gone beyond tears. That is how I knew the damage had gone deep. Tears are for pain that still wants witness. What sat in my daughter then was not a need to be seen. It was reorganization. Every private moment with her husband was being called back. Every explanation, every lowered voice, every careful word that had once felt like intimacy, now turning over in her mind and settling into a different shape. Not love, strategy. Trevor did not speak, and that mattered more than any apology he might have tried to force out of himself. He had spent too many months surviving on language, pressure, delay, one last stretch, temporary, complicated. Words had been his way out of everything. But in that room, for the first time, words had nowhere left to go. He looked smaller, not physically, structurally, like something that had been held upright by careful positioning had finally lost the support it depended on. Harriet rose first, not abruptly, not dramatically. She placed both hands on the arms of the chair and stood with a kind of controlled dignity that refused to let the moment bend her shape. For a second, she said nothing. Then she looked at me. There was no apology in her eyes. She had not authored the harm. But there was acknowledgement. Clear. Undeniable. Of the kind women exchange when one has just discovered another has been carrying weight in silence that should never have belonged to her alone. Then she turned to her son. She did not say his name, did not ask him why, did not ask him anything at all. And that was what made it heavier, because anger still leaves room for a response. Her silence did not. She picked up her handbag, adjusted it once on her shoulder, and walked toward the door with slow, deliberate steps. Nobody followed her. Nobody stopped her. When the door closed behind her, it did not slam. It clicked, soft, precise, final in a way that echoed longer than any raised voice could have. That sound landed on Trevor harder than anything I had said. Alana didn't move. He looked at her then. Really looked. And that was where the real collapse lived. Because my daughter was still there, still sitting, still wearing her ring, still close enough to reach, but the part of her that responded to him, the part that believed him, was gone. Not shaken, not bruised, gone. And he could see it. That was the first moment that evening he did not look like a man trying to manage a situation. He looked like a man realizing something had already ended without asking his permission. I stood then, not to take control, because I no longer needed to. "I am not discussing this again tonight," I said. "The papers speak clearly." No one argued. No one tried to reopen anything. That told me more than any agreement could have. Alana lifted her eyes to me. For the first time in minutes, there was no anger in them. That was what stayed with me. If she had been angry, I could have stood inside it easily. But what looked back at me was something quieter, older, heavier. The stunned ache of a daughter realizing her mother had been holding her life together while she herself had been unknowingly helping to fund the lie that threatened it. She nodded once, just once. That was all. No dramatic goodbye, no declarations, no choosing sides in front of an audience. Real life does not always give you that kind of closure. What it gives, instead, are smaller shifts that do more damage over time. Colder drives home, longer silences at night, conversations that sound normal but no longer feel safe, a marriage that continues, but no longer rests on trust. That was where theirs went. Not to flames, to fracture, quiet, precise, permanent in ways that would only become visible later. And me? I did not leave that room with triumph. Triumph is too loud a word for what I felt. What I felt was release. The old arrangement was gone. I was no longer the hidden support beam beneath other people's appearances, no longer the quiet answer to emergencies that arrived dressed as dignity and left dressed as gratitude. Whatever happened next, between husband and wife, between son and mother, between truth and consequence, would happen without my silence being used to hold it together. For 8 months, I was holding their lives together in secret. The day I brought every receipt into one room, the only thing that stopped moving was the lie.